Chris Thomas King is the blues. From his birth through his upbringing into his musical education, out of his vast body of work to the innards of his soul, he embodies the blues. Take one look at him with his guitar in his hand or seated at the piano, or read his story on his website, christhomasking.com, or even better, take a listen for a minute, any minute, on his new album, Hotel Voodoo, and you'll know Chris is the blues. The last time he was on the Break It Down show, our episode 140, he defined the very origin of the blues, and today we get even further into it. I make this point to give some context around the decision of the National Academy of Recording Arts and Sciences, NARAS, the organization that brings us the Grammy Awards, to deem our friend ineligible to compete in the category of Best Contemporary Blues Album. We talk about it in greater detail on today's episode with our guest, our friend, our guiding light of the blues, Chris Thomas King.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Cruz.
This is Bryce Vine.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This
East.
is Sebastian Younger.
This is Daryl Amy.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summit.
This is Dr. Bob Greenberg.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Hi, this is Chris Thomas King, and you're listening to the Break It Down Show.
And now, the Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
Chris Thomas King is a blues artist, through and through. Pretty much everything that he does allows for a blues expression and exploration for anything else he wants to do. But in every way that we know and love about the blues, Chris Thomas King embodies it. However, recent developments have seen you, Chris, removed from the blues ballot for this year's Grammy Awards and your latest album, Hotel Voodoo. Please tell us the story.
About the removal, what I know about it is I was encouraging on my tours. I was on a national television program, news program out of Chicago just a week ago, doing a guest spot and doing an interview. I let voters know that my new album, Hotel Voodoo, was under consideration for contemporary blues, and that, please consider it, and so on and so forth. And it was just, nothing extraordinary or whatever. It's just routine stuff. But then as people began to try to vote, and the voting deadline ended October 31st. But while the voting was open for a few weeks, people were trying to vote, but they couldn't find my name. When I went in to try to find my name and logged in to try to vote for my own record, I realized that I wasn't there. So I called the regional rep in New Orleans, the regional Grammy rep in New Orleans, to inquire what happened, because when we made our submissions over the summer, everything checked out. We had our receipts. We submitted into the right category, contemporary blues, and couldn't find it. So he said he would look into it. Eventually, he contacted the LA office. The chair of the blues committee called me to try to justify why I was removed, that I was not, long story short, he said the album wasn't a blues album. I was not a blues artist. Therefore, I can't compete in that category in traditional blues, contemporary blues, or anything blues, period, because I wasn't a blues artist. But the ironic thing is, or the absurdity is, Mick Jagger won the award last year for Best Blues Album. So basically they're telling me I don't fit whatever their criteria is, but Mick Jagger does.
And I know I'm asking you, and I'm sort of asking the choir here, but how the heck can they say that? I mean, literally the first words in your album are, "Born in a shotgun shack." Nothing's more bluesy than that line. And then as I listened to the album and I played it, look, we do a lot of musical stuff here, so I won't say that I'm a layman. I took people who don't have a strong grasp of the genre and I said, "What does it sound like to you?" And they all said, "The blues." How can they, taking apart, like, away from your lineage and your clear past, and we got to cover that for the audience a little bit, but just all that aside, just the album itself, I heard 12-bar blues. I heard "My Baby's Gone" kind of lyrics, in the song where you talk about how, like, the paternity test comes back and she was lying.
Yeah, that song, Have You Seen My Princess? Yeah.
Have You Seen My Princess? Yeah, exactly. Like, that's a blues song. And so maybe you want to say that, I don't know, one of the songs doesn't have a bluesy sound to it, but which song is that? Because you sound like your peers. You sound a lot like how, Eric Clapton might sound or B.B. King might sound. You sound like a blues musician. How in the world can they justify, or what? I mean, that's what they have to do is justify. But I frankly, I thought before I listened to the album, I was going to be like, well, it's contemporary and Chris gets to push the boundaries if he wants to because he's a blues artist. But this is a blues album. What the heck happened?
Well, I mean, maybe one of you guys might have an explanation because it's inexplicable to me. It's absurd beyond reason. You just can't reason it. And so I had no choice but to make public, with my open letter, which I posted on Facebook the next day, to just, bring it to the attention. I didn't know that to the attention of the public. I didn't know if anybody would care or give a damn, but it turns out a lot of people it seemed to touch a nerve with a lot of people. And, so like I said in my open letter, it's not necessarily just about me. There's a larger context to this. And, for people that don't really follow the blues very much or know the story of it, it's been building to this point for some time. This didn't just come out of the, just like something that just fell from a tree yesterday. This has been building over the years. And the only way that I can describe it for people who are just casual, if you start naming blues people, they wouldn't even know who you're talking about. But just a casual listener or the person who's casually interested in this controversy, it's been building here for some time. And I use our little musical landscape, which is very, very small and, very decrepit, so to speak. But it's being gentrified. And I think when I use the term like gentrified, I think people know what I'm talking about. We were given this Chitlin circuit. We were given this, we had this little quote unquote treaty with rock and roll that even though they were doing our music, which they called rock and roll, but we all knew it was blues. But what could we do about it? But the treaty, the quote unquote treaty, metaphorical treaty was that we play the jug joints, the honky tonks, these kinds of places, and we just scratch a living, scratch by, and they go play the arenas. They get all the major, radio exposure and everything else. And the treaty was, this is our little cultural space. And now that treaty has been just torn up, and here they come to push us out. And I'm just an example of a larger problem.
That's amazing to me that you could be pushed out of a category that you described it perfectly. You're being pushed out of your home for gentrification. So, we would love for the Grammys to include you, and we would love for the Academy to express their position. I don't know what it is. It sounds like you haven't been given an explanation for what it is. We will certainly post a link to your open letter to NARAS, the National Academy of Recording Arts and Sciences. That's the body that governs the Grammy Awards. We want to ask, just to give it the proper framework as you are doing now, the ability for somebody at the organization to arbitrarily decide that you're no longer a fit in the category. We're talking about, for our listeners, we're talking about Chris Thomas King is an adventurous artist. He's going to explore territory. But you are a blues artist and always have been through and through. So this is really no different than, to use your gentrification analogy, you having a situation where you are embodying what you do and taking the normal course of risks that an artist must take in just artistic exploration. And then, and I'm being generous, I think, in being able to say if they're justifying why you're not a blues artist, maybe you have, explored a little further than the fence. But I don't even think that applies here. I mean, did you do anything on this album that you would consider much different than you have in your previous explorations that have been eligible for Grammys in the category?
No. This album is more in the blues tradition that I come from than many of my previous albums. I mean, I released an album in 2000, I think it was 2003, 2004, called Dirty South Hip Hop Blues. Just like the title says, it was a hip hop blues album. So I'm the person who brought hip hop aesthetics into the blues. I've been on the cutting edge of the blues for decades. Everybody kind of knows that that's kind of what I do. I make a blues. I've been making blues music, kind of with my expressing my generation's angst or my generation's aspirations or my generation's point of view
for nearly 40 years.
For a long time, yeah. I am a Grammy winner, and so I've done albums that are far more on the edge, of pushing the boundaries, than this particular record. This particular record is so that musically that it just that lends itself to the absurdity.
You bring the beer, I'll bring the wine.
Yeah, it is really a return to your roots as much as anybody has ever done.
And that's a good way to put it, because and I'm trying not to, go into these deep dives and get into the weeds on this, because I know most people haven't followed this story. They probably are confused about what is blues and what isn't blues, to be honest with you. And none of us really know what the criteria that they're using is. They haven't made that public. I will say that on this particular record, the way it was conceived, it's called Hotel Voodoo. Kind of like the Hotel California, but Hotel Voodoo. Obviously, Hotel Voodoo is in New Orleans. And I conceived it as an album, a vinyl album, where on side A, there's a suite of songs called the Baron Samedi Suite. Baron Samedi is the Lord of the Crossroads in voodoo lore. Side 2 is the Jelly Roll Suite. So you can go into the Baron Samedi Suite, and you can it's a little more funkier, it's a little more colorful and so forth. And then you go into the Jelly Roll Suite, and I'm playing the piano on these tracks. I'm a guitarist, for those that don't know, and I'm playing piano on these in the Jelly Roll Suite. The first song in the Jelly Roll Suite is called "The Blues was born in Louisiana." The second song is called "White Folk Call It Jazz," and then the third song in the Jelly Roll Suite is called "Tabby's on the Bayou," which is the juke joint I grew up with and my family's juke joint. It's a tribute to that, and I'm naming all these, old bygone, blues musicians that as a young man I learned from, Rafe O'Neal, Silas Hogan, Guitar Kelly, and Henry Gray. Henry Gray is 93 years old. He's a piano player. He's still playing. And Tabby's on the Bayou is kind of a tribute to him and a tribute to those hoodoo parties that my dad, we call them hoodoo parties because he had a hit record called Hoodoo Party in 1961 on Excello Records. My dad's name was Tabby Thomas. And had Thursday night hoodoo parties at his club for a long time that became kind of legendary. But so the whole thing is an ode to my culture, how I came up, and like you guys said when we started the interview, born in a shotgun shack.
Everything about this is blues through and through.
Yeah, I mean, now there's a stereotypical trope about what blues is, and by that trope, even though it's pseudo, this album should fit that, even though it's a trope, an old trope that's outdated. But on the other hand, I am expressing a music. You guys talked about me reaching my roots. I'm from Louisiana. This is how we express ourselves in Louisiana. Do we really want, do the Grammys, do they really want me to sound no different than a Seattle blues band or a Canadian blues band or a British blues group? You know, do they want us all to sound exactly the same and sound generic? Or should a Louisiana blues artist express the blues using his culture, you know, to delve into his roots and express it the way that we express it here in Louisiana? I'm not saying that people can't express it the way people express it in Vancouver or Singapore or, you know, or London. But I'm saying, why try to delegitimize my culture? You know, why reject my cultural expression? And I have my ideas about, you know, what was so, why they decided to remove me. And it really don't have a lot to do with the actual sound of my album. I think it's the message that that I'm bringing forward is really what they want to silence.
Well, I think that you're left with only a few options, and because it can't be the music, it just can't be. There's no way that. I mean, here's Voodoo Child on Hell's Highway. That just sounds like a blues song, you know. I mean, it's 100%. There's no way. The Rock and Roll Conjurer, for sure. Have you seen My Princess? I could name every one of these songs on the album. The fact is, this is a blues album. So
it's an album with a Jelly Roll suite.
Yeah. I mean, it's Tabby's on the Bayou. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what you're made of, and because you're clearly made of the blues. You walk down the street, that's the blues. You eat a burrito, that's the blues. Like, there's nothing you can do about it. We have so you've been a guest on the show before, episode 140. Everybody should go listen. We did it in the French Quarter. It's like, this man is the blues. This is the important part. So whatever you do, you are a genre defining person.
You're saying that, but the Grammys says I'm not, but Mick Jagger is.
I mean, and I'm just trying to inform the audience here. I mean, sure. Yeah, Mick Jagger's got a long blues pedigree from his point of view and doing his things, and the Grammys absolutely have to, you know, account for the bigness of what the Rolling Stones are. That's great, but there's also plenty of room for someone like Christ Thomas King, who, you know, whatever you do is the blues. Let's talk a little bit about where you grew up, because you did grow up in these juke joints. You did grow up, you know, doing things, playing. I mean, you were a kid watching your dad, who's a blues guy, who plays with all of these legends. Talk a little bit about your roots so we can get really an understanding of what it means to be made from the blues.
Well, I think, you know, I don't want to, like I said, you know, I'm a symptom. This is a symptom of a larger issue. And so, yeah, I could go on and talk about, you know, my story personally, but let me just expand it out a little bit. This is a rejection of my culture. We're not talking about skin color here. We're talking about my culture is being rejected, is being delegitimized. And I'll ask the question to the listener: do anybody want to come and visit Louisiana and say you're from, and I'm not putting down any other place, I'm just saying that we have a unique culture. If you're from Iowa, or if you're from Massachusetts, or if you're from California, do you really want to come to Louisiana and hear and go and have the same experience you have at home? Have all the musicians in Louisiana play exactly the way they play in these other places? Or do you want to come down here and enjoy the rich, vibrant, you know, culture that we have here, and we express it in a way that's unique. It's based on an old Creole culture that is still vibrant, that's still alive. It haven't been totally Americanized or anglicized, and we've been fighting against, you know, Creole culture have been fighting against anglicized, the Anglicization of our culture, dating back, you know, since the Louisiana Purchase. You know, we've been trying to maintain the way that we express ourselves and trying to say it's nothing sinful about the way we express ourselves. You know, we celebrate life in a particular way. I mean, do the rest of America really want us to get rid of Mardi Gras? Do they want us to get rid of our musical culture and just become generic, that is kind of the larger, statement that is being made here by rejecting this album. This album is immersed in the culture that I came up in, a creolized blues culture. And by the way, the statement of the record is in the Jelly Roll Suite is that the blues was born in Louisiana. And that don't fit these people's narrative about what they really want, what they've been pushing all these years. And it's not new to me. These people are still, what would you call them? They're disciples of people from the 1920s and 30s who suppressed Jelly Roll Martin's music. They said they tried to make Jelly Roll Martin some kind of kook or diminish, him and hide a lot of what he recorded at the Library of Congress years ago, telling Alan Lomax and these people that they had the story all wrong. That he told them that Jelly Roll Martin was that W.C. Handy was a fraud, and that W.C. Handy had stole his music, and that the blues came from Louisiana, and this is how you express it and demonstrate it, and did the whole thing. And so in my Jelly Roll Suite, I'm thinking this is not even controversial. If you don't have to agree with the statement I'm making that the blues came from Louisiana, but you do know my intent. My intent was to make a blues statement about my culture. And, if you don't like my statement, that's not a reason to banish me from the categories. Now, they got rappers who will go out there and say the most disgusting and vile things about women, say the most disgusting and vile things about, violence, this, and all kind of derogatory stuff, demeaning themselves even. But they're not, even if you don't have to agree with their message, but they never take these people out of the categories for hip hop and rap because of their content, because of what they're saying. But what I'm saying is so outrageous. This is so beyond the pale. We got to remove Christ Thomas King. We got to banish him from even competing or getting on the ballot in any blues category that we have. We don't have no category for what he has to say. If I didn't say it clearly, and if I didn't express myself musically well and make my statement well, let the public decide. Let people vote on that. Let people decide themselves. Maybe you can give it a bad review. Maybe it doesn't deserve any recognition, but to banish it and try to delegitimize it, they're making a political statement that's like absurd and beyond the pale, and it needs to be brought to the attention of people who care about, culture and care about these kinds of things and care about the arts. And, because I'm here just trying to beautify the world with my music, trying to add some beauty, trying to enlighten some people, make some people feel good about things with my music, make a statement every once in a while. But I mean, when I'm saying, believe me, it should not be cause this much controversy. What is so controversial?
Wow. I'm going to just, if we haven't done it enough, I want to point our listeners, first of all, to ChrisThomasKing.com. We'll put a link on the show page when we drop this episode, but also to the album Hotel Voodoo, which is what we're talking about here. And the more and more you talk about it, the more it is almost as if you really consider yourself as being responsible as a custodian of the art form. And there's no matter whether it's blues or hip hop or anything, when an artist feels it all the way down to their bones that there's a responsibility to be the custodian of the art form, there's no real representation that's any more true in any category than that. And that's what really makes this. I mean,
well, I appreciate what you're saying, but I don't want to come off as a historian or some kind of preservationist.
Yeah,
that's not how. I mean, our
well,
culture
it's not
in Louisiana,
that, but the way
our
that
culture
you
in
describe
Louisiana
it
is alive and well. But
yeah,
I'm forced in this position. I'm forced to defend my culture.
Well, and not only that, but we're talking about an organization that's forcing you out of the category that you have won in the past. So it's not even like they can't use the excuse of, well, we don't recognize Chris Thomas King because we haven't heard from him before. You've been a blues artist to the point where you have a career within the category. This would be, and I'm doing this for the benefit of our listeners and for myself, really, akin to saying that Outkast is, they're a little different, or they're more colloquial, or however you want to justify it, but they're no longer considered a hip-hop artist for whatever reason. There's no, I really can't even, I'm trying to put it in a context that our listener can understand the absurdity of it. And I'm doing a poor job because there's no way to really put it across.
Yeah, I don't get it either. So, yes, I know that you say something that some people might be, they might disagree with, in the fact that the blues comes from Louisiana. Like you said in the first episode, it's the word blue, but it's the French way, and it's where the music was created. You get to, especially with your pedigree, you get to have that conversation. And as an artist, I was having this conversation with Jon yesterday. We were trying to figure out what to do so we represent everything fairly. But because of who you are, because you've won a Grammy in this category, you get to make us uncomfortable with what the blues is and add in hip hop elements to it, because you are exploring this landscape for us. I can't do it. I'm a dude that lives in Orange County that can play a few open chords on a guitar. I need you to show me those things. And so I'm really disappointed that the Grammys is, for whatever justification, not taking this album seriously and kicking you out of the category. I mean, I can't put my head around it, if this is about music. And if it's about your statement of where the blues comes from, I still don't understand it. You are the artist. You are the one telling us and showing us what the blues is. And if you're saying it's from Louisiana,
I guess I just don't sound as British as they would like me to sound.
Well, and like you said, Chris, it's not even a matter of...
You got to contrast this with Mick Jagger.
Yeah.
He wasn't just allowed on the ballot. He won.
Right.
He won for Best Blues Album. And I didn't, publicly come out and lash out, anything like that. It made me uncomfortable that they were even nominated. But, because it was a harbinger of what was to come. And here we are. The bad vibes I got about just them even competing in this category, when they really should have been in traditional rock or something, because, their new music don't sound anything different than what they started out. They started out playing Little Red Rooster and all this stuff. Their early albums were rock and roll. So if anything, this is what they made was a classic rock record. So why are they competing with us, and pushing us out of our, and this is not just me against Mick Jagger. It's just that but he and his Rolling Stones symbolizes the madness, how maddening this is, that I can't even get on the ballot. We're not talking about winning. I'm not griping because I don't win or because I'm not nominated.
Right.
If people think my record is terrible, say that. But they say my record is brilliant. The chairman of the blues committee told me personally on the phone when he called me to explain to me why I wasn't a blues artist and why this thing didn't fit his quote unquote pseudo criteria. He said it was brilliant. It's a great album, but it wasn't authentically blues.
Wow.
I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah.
But, he just dismissed me, my culture and everything. What can I do? I can't change who I am. I can't change my background. And I don't think that myself or anybody else in Louisiana should stop performing the music with a Louisiana cultural bent on it. And I'll give you guys a mic on that.
No, but say what you got to say, because this we want to hear from you.
This is for people who haven't been following this story. Like I said, it's been building to this point. And like I said, the Rolling Stones being nominated is only the floodgates open. It was only a harbinger of what was to come. I didn't know that I would, at the time, I thought it might be further down the line, but now they won't even let me compete. They saying I don't fit. And let me just do a few definitions for people listening. Couple of things, because words change over time. Blues have a long history, where some other musical genres, they're more the modern era, so we kind of have a sense of how they got started and all this, But let me use the word Creole. When I reference the word Creole and Creole culture, originally Creole meant when Louisiana was a Spanish colony ruled by the Spanish crown. We had a whole different system of how they dealt with with the whole slave thing and all this stuff. I'm talking about from the 1700s, on to when Louisiana was purchased. But we had a whole different system here, opposed to the British colonies. And the British colonies had we know what that history was like, when it came to the contrast of black and white and such. But in Louisiana, it was Catholic. It was a lot more open. You had people intermarrying. You had people having, music on Sundays and dances and balls like every day of the week. And they just had a zest for life that music was just always a part of. But more importantly, specifically, the word Creole originally is a Spanish Portuguese word that meant an African born in a Spanish colony. So if your parents came directly from Africa, they weren't Creole. But if they had a child, that child was Creole by birth, because it just means it's just a simple term that means native to the land you're born in. And so they might not be able to totally, change, those Africans' religion or change their way of life or whatever, as easy as it might be to change a Creole person who was born in that territory. Then their first language is probably going to be English or Spanish or French or whatever it happens to be. So it's just a distinction that, that's how it started. But then after Louisiana was purchased by Thomas Jefferson, everybody in Louisiana called themselves Creoles, native to the land, whether they were French or Spanish or black. They all did that, as opposed to the Anglo people coming in from America. And they came in trying to tell people black and white people can't dance together. They created blue laws saying that you can't do music in festivals on Sunday. They tried to shut down Congo Square. And I can go on, but I'm not trying to give a history lesson. I'm just trying to give some background on when I say Creole culture. We fought against, these Anglo Puritan, superstitious ideas, for years and years and years. And that's why when you visit New Orleans, we didn't exactly win that fight, but we won it a little more than maybe some other places. We have maintained the way we express our culture. I mean, you'd be driving down the street in New Orleans and a parade might break out at any time. I mean, they want to say they have this ridiculous Anglo definition of blues that, that is sad and depressed and down in the dumps. But we're not like that even at a funeral. We have funerals, and the funerals are the gaiety and the partying and the drinking and the dancing and the celebration of the person's life. We celebrate funerals different than everybody else. We do everything a little bit different. I call that, that's our Creole way of expressing things. That's part of our culture. That's who we are. And that's what my album is celebrating. When I say the blues was born in Louisiana, that's kind of what it's celebrating. It was always a pushback and a tug of war between who was going to win, those blue laws from the New England states, people who came down here and tried to change our culture, and us pushing back saying ain't nothing wrong, with the way that we express ourselves. We're not going to shut down Mardi Gras because you guys, don't like it. We're not going to stop expressing our culture in the way that we express it because you guys think it's, the devil's music or it's blasphemy or something. Because we do take a Christian song like When the Saints Go Marching In and turn it into a party anthem, and women are showing their breasts and we're drinking beers and stuff like that. And then the old church people say that, well, that's the devil's music. But we don't believe that. We never believed that. And that's just, those people have an old superstition that they're trying to impose on us. They're encroaching on our culture. And we've been pushing back, and our music is part of that pushback. Our music is something that inspired, the Harlem Renaissance, and inspired, women coming out to speakeasies and stuff. I mean, we always said, ain't nothing wrong with drinking beer. We were the soundtrack to speakeasies in Chicago and New York and places like that. As far as liberation and stuff, blues is the soundtrack of that. When the conductor says you have to play the music exactly as written on the written page and not go one note or two this way or that way, we rejected that. And we said, no, we're going to do it our way. I got a better idea. And you have Jelly Roll Morton, King Oliver, Louis Armstrong, people like that improvising over this stuff and doing it, creolizing this music. You might have a national anthem, but the New Orleans musicians took a knee, so to speak, with their horns and with their instruments and said, we don't want you to impose on our culture because we love who we are. We don't believe in your superstitions. And so my album is celebrating that. And it's this message that they're rejecting because the real blues message goes back, way back to people like Charlotte Osgood Mason, Dorothy Scarborough, John Lomax, Alan Lomax. These people were primitivists. And they believed that African Americans were primitives, with feeble minds and so on and so forth. And I can go into a lot of detail about it, but they were primitivists. So if we're expressing this music, which is this brilliant, it's America's great musical awakening, really. It's the only real musical culture America had. Prior to that, they were just imitating things that happened in Europe. But they didn't want us to be the face of America's culture. So they worked against that. And they, primitivism and, all this folk blues, silly stuff, this stuff is outdated. But they still expect me to play into these primitive, stereotypes and tropes that was established way back with John Lomax. And people that don't know John Lomax, look him up. He, discovered lead belly and so on and so forth. Charlotte Osgood Mason, she was a very wealthy, eccentric widow who financed the Harlem Renaissance, and Zora Neale Hurston and Langston Hughes and all these people. And when she stopped funding them, that was the end of the Harlem Renaissance. So the Harlem Renaissance was even a primitivist movement, and I could go into details about this stuff, but it's for another forum. But I'm just trying to keep the focus here on music, but I want people to know that we're dealing with an old trope bordering on minstrelsy as far as what African American artists are allowed to do. Paul McCartney can do Sgt. Pepper, and they say, wow, that's brilliant. He's expanding the possibilities of rock and roll and, bringing new ideas into it and things like that. Christ Thomas King do it, and then he's got to be silenced. He's got to be eliminated. We can't let people, he doesn't fit our primitivist notion of what he should be doing. He only should play, here are the notes you can play on the piano. You can play this one, but you can't play that one. You can play this note and this chord, but you can't play these. I can play all the notes on the piano. You don't control what I can play on the piano or what notes I can play on the guitar. Whatever my inspiration is and my talent is, I can express that. So I say all that to give some background to this long running deal. And here we are where, they just want to, push me aside. Now, there's other African-American artists who play into these tropes. But when I say African-American artists like me, African-American artists that won't play along, we have been pushed out.
This episode of the Break It Down Show is brought to you by Lions Rock Productions.
That's us.
We publish, evaluate, and develop podcasts just like this one, consult others to build their own, and create associated content and content marketing strategies.
So if you're launching or expanding your social media presence, your business, or your personal brand, or if you just want to take your media presence to the next level,
reach out to us on Twitter
at Pete A. Turner
or at JohnLG69
at the Break It Down Show.
There's 1,000 ways to get a hold of us.
Now enjoy the show.
But when I say African American artists like me, African American artists that won't play along, we have been pushed out.
Well, I really appreciate the history lesson that you are giving us, because it gives us a tremendous amount of context, and I don't want the point to be lost that Hotel Voodoo is a spectacular piece of work. Listeners, controversy aside, go get this record, enrich your life, enrich your listening, and just enjoy the album, because it's a wonderful piece of work that we know you're going to love. There is some controversy here, and like I said, you're giving us some context about this controversy, but I don't want it to be lost on our listeners that ultimately what we're talking about is a brilliant album in Hotel Voodoo that you should go and get and listen to it and enjoy it and love it and figure out why this musical landscape is something to be celebrated, and why we're talking to Christ Thomas King today as somebody who is our generation's custodian in part of a musical history that is deserving of the embrace. And I don't want to use the word preservation because I don't want to lock you into that. Like you said, you're not a historian, although you have given us a tremendous and generous history lesson today that should be celebrated. But just to honor the fact that you have I use the word honor, you have given tribute to the way that you grew up and the expression that you learned growing up, and to everything that you've embodied in your illustrious career, and we love it. There's going to be links to everything on the show page, and everybody should go and listen for yourselves, because ultimately the point that you're making, Chris, is not that you deserve anything more than a fair shake at allowing all of the Academy's voters to decide for themselves. And what we're talking about here is not that you've been relegated to a position where you can't win, but you've been relegated to a position where you can't play. And that's not fair to any category, to any artist who has given what you've given to the blues and given to us as listeners, to everybody out there who enjoys the music, because ultimately that's really what it's all about, is that you've given of yourself, something that we all can love and enjoy. We should be able, and by we, I mean listeners, and we will vote with our wallets and vote with our ears. But to just taking you out of the category makes it so that the listeners who understand the tribute that you've paid to the art form, they don't get a say, and that's ultimately the injustice that we're talking about here. But before we even, and we have been talking about that topic, I don't want it to be lost on our listeners. We're talking about a great piece of work that you all should listen to before you give any consideration to the fact that there is some controversy about this record. It's a great record, and you're going to love it. So, there. Now, can we talk about your direction moving forward? What do you see for yourself as an artist, and where do you see yourself dedicating the music that you make, and what is it that you want to explore as we enter the second half of your career?
Yeah, well, I right now I have an album that I'm in the mixing stages of. It hasn't been titled yet, but I imagine I'll get it out there after the holidays. And I have a couple other projects that's probably a little premature to talk about. One particular project is pretty ambitious, but it's a little early a musical project that's a little early to talk about. But, people should know that that the blues, the things I'm saying to you sound remarkable and sounds like, man, I hadn't heard that perspective before. And the reason you haven't heard that perspective before is because there's no authentic history of this culture and of this music. I have been working on a manuscript that I plan to, find a publisher for, sometime real soon and get that out there, because this music, this culture doesn't have a history. The story has never been told. Now, there's been books written about the blues and things like that, but the public, the people listening, should know that they've been told that the blues, originated somewhere in the Mississippi Delta, but they don't realize that there was nobody living in the Mississippi Delta to originate any blues. They think that when they talk about the Mississippi Delta, people think they're talking about antebellum plantations, but there were never any slaves in the Mississippi Delta. There was never any African Americans in the Mississippi Delta. There was no human beings in the Mississippi Delta. There was only black bears and Florida panthers and wild wolves running around the Delta until the early 1900s. So we don't even have to talk about music as opposed to whether the blues came from New Orleans first or where they came from the Delta first. It's not even a question. It's like there was no human beings there to make it. They chopped down those trees and drained the Delta and started, the Dockery plantation started, I think, right around the turn of the century. And they started recruiting people to come up there and work on those plantations. That has nothing to do with antebellum times. And people like Jelly Roll Martin, people like Buddy Bolden, which I sing about, and the blues was born in Louisiana. You can find newspaper clippings, you can find eyewitness accounts, you can find so much evidence, photographic evidence and everything else, that people were already playing. This music was well established in New Orleans and in Louisiana in the 1890s when there were no human beings in the Delta. And that's just a myth and a fairy tale that, people just need to come to grips with. And sometimes in conversations with people, when I mention that, it just don't sink in. They just can't believe it because they just believe it to be so. But that's just, a romanticism or some kind of, emotional, maybe you want it to be true, but it's just not true. And so we're not even talking about what notes they played and all that. There was no such, the Delta musicians, Robert Johnson, all these Delta musicians, Muddy Waters, these people learned the music from the New Orleans musicians. When the New Orleans musicians made records, those records made their way to the plantation store, and at the plantation store, they bought these phonographs and they learned how to play the blues in the Delta in the 1920s and 30s from Louisiana musicians who were the first on record.
But and there was music before there was the ability to record it. And by the time there was the ability to record it, that music had its origins already sprouted before there were human beings on the Mississippi Delta.
Exactly. The reason you can't find a photograph of nobody in the Delta, and you're asking, well, what street did they play the blues on in the Delta? They can't tell you. What address so I can look it up? What, was there any newspaper printed in the Delta at that time so I can research the digitized newspaper? No. Any court records? What was the courthouse in the Delta? There's no courthouse. There's no nothing. It's just trees, cane brakes, black bears, and Teddy Roosevelt in the Delta in 1902 hunting bears. It never happened.
Wow.
Robert Johnson wasn't even born. Jelly Roll Martin had already left Louisiana before Robert Johnson was born.
That is an amazing revelation for me. I also want to say this, Chris, because like Pete said, you've been on the show before. The blues education that we've received from you specifically has been just amazing.
The other thing I wanted to say too, first, I just bought the album because, I want to support the artists who are supporting us on the show. So you've got an order in from me. Thank you very much. And I'll be taking that CD and handing it to someone that needs to have a great piece of music, because that's what we do around here. Yeah, great. Thanks for a free CD or whatever, but I'm going to go ahead and buy one too. Cause I know what it's like to be an artist and in my case, tell stories. You're out there, singing the blues, and I just want to thank you with a couple of bucks. And when you come to town, I'm going to buy a ticket and watch you play. But the blues it's part of the American history. Like you said, it's our absolute, like, it's our thing. It didn't originate in Russia. It didn't originate in London. It was sang back to us. It bounced back from there. But, it has this questionable origin story. And if that seems implausible to the listener, understand this. Abner Doubleday did not invent baseball in New York. That's an absolute proven historical false. Like, it did not happen in Cooperstown, but it became the legend, and it became where they built the museum and everything else, but it has nothing to do with reality. And so if we think, what Chris is saying is not possible, it's absolutely possible. And like you said, there's books written about the origins, but the actual history, when you go out and you go to verify things and you try to find a courthouse, or you try to find the club in Mississippi where, we have an idea of where rock and roll started in terms of like the actual rock and roll thing. And Ike Turner gets to be part of that conversation. You may disagree, and maybe it's 5 years this way or 5 years that way or whatever, but you've got it honed down to a narrow spot. It doesn't work that way with the blues story from Mississippi. It just doesn't. I mean, Louisiana, everything was invented in New Orleans. That's what I learned when I went down there. Sunday morning, brunch, all these things were all invented down there. So
certainly if they have to do with a good time.
Yeah, anything. Mint julep, done. Let's do it right there. Who knows? Grasshoppers, yes, done. So, one, thank you for doing what you do, man. And I, if it's any consolation, I know you're the blues. I've met you. It's just no doubt about it. So thank you for doing what you're doing. Please keep going, and please keep writing this great music. I love this album. I love it. I was listen to music all the time. We have this thing called an album fight that we do as part of the show every week. And we put two albums together. We match them up track for track. And then you decide which one wins. And it's an exercise in promoting the albums, but also just a way to reveal music that needs to be heard and everything. So at some point, we're going to put this album in there because it is great. It's catchy, and there's just so many different great things about it. So I know we've had to go through a lot of things to get to this point to thank you and recognize how good it is. But legitimately, I really enjoyed the album. I enjoyed the modern things you brought in there. I heard some influences that I'm just like, yeah, I always try to guess like what you're listening to when you're putting an album together. This is my question. What were you listening to when you were putting this together? Like, oh, I want to take some of that, because you were definitely not afraid of that. What did you hear that you're like, I want a little bit of that? Oh, I like this. This inspires me. What were some of those things?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a really good question. And I'll talk again about the Jelly Roll Suite. In the Jelly Roll Suite, I introduced the clarinet back into the blues. The original blues band, usually had a clarinet in it. And it's such an amazing, expressive instrument because it has these 3 octaves that it can get into. And one of the greatest, just the most fantastic musicians and blues musicians you ever are going to hear solo was Sidney Bechet. And Sidney Bechet is kind of what I was thinking about instead of, because normally you hear a guitarist do a blues album and he's going to, every time there's a space to throw in a solo, he's going to take it, fill it up. But I really wanted to make, as part of my musical statement, as saying that the blues, came from Louisiana, it's a Creole expression originally. And the world is welcome to share in that. We want to Creolize the world if we can, where everybody can live together and get along together and like you say, have brunch together. What's wrong with people dancing together? But apparently some people, they want to control who can dance with who. And they got all these other things they want to, that's another story. But anyway, so I wanted to introduce the clarinet back in and give a nod to Sidney Bechet. Sidney Bechet was a fantastic blues musician. But, in blues, the only horn that people allow you to use is the harmonica. And it's only so, I've done harmonicas. I play harmonica. I have nothing against the harmonica. But, there's only so much you can do with a harmonica after about 20 albums. It's like you just have to find some other interests, So, but then again, the harmonica is associated with a hobo, some guy, hoboing on the train and all this downtrodden type of thing. And the clarinet somehow is not associated with hobos, And so again, I guess they have a criteria that says you can't play blues and have a clarinet solo in the song, which is absurd because that's how we played the blues in Louisiana for years. There's a bunch of great, clarinetists, because there was no electric guitar. There was no Marshall amps back in early 1900s. So the loudest instruments were the trumpet, was the clarinet and things like that. And
reeded instruments allow for some rasp too.
Yeah, it's very expressive, and so I decided to introduce that back into the the colors that we can paint with as blues musicians. But you see, it don't fit the primitive trope, and that's that. It all gets back to this, and this is an outdated thing that goes way back. And these people are devotees. Now, I'm not saying that the people on the Grammy committee are racist. I'm not saying that. I'm not getting anybody's mind, but they need to know. They need to be called out that they're perpetuating racist tropes. And then if you enlighten people and tell them and show them that this is disparaging to my culture, this is not. It's first of all, it's not true. These things that you believe, and then second of all, you're disparaging the whole culture, or you're trying to twist my culture to fit into your primitivist, idea of what I'm supposed to be. And when you show that to people and then they continue to do it, then, well, hey, let their actions speak for themselves. But they have to know that these old tropes that they're perpetuating, from John Lomax, who was a racist, Charlotte Osgood Mason, who was a racist, Dorothy Scarborough, who was a racist. They're still perpetuating these things. And in New Orleans, we took down those Confederate statues. And so a lot of these other things that go along with it, it's time for those things to be retired too. And, just to let people know, the clarinet is one of the oldest African instruments there is. The clarinet, the reed instrument. You can see it on bas reliefs and all over ancient Africa, BC time, dating back 4,000 years. It's one of the oldest African instruments there is. So, I mean, why should someone forbid me from using a damn clarinet in my song? I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, when you say it like that, it really truly is silly.
I'm not primitive enough. That's the bottom line. And I'm setting a bad example for all the other African American blues musicians. So they want to silence me, and they just need people to go along and I'm not going to contribute to the demise of my culture, and some people will, but I refuse to do that.
That Le Blues was born in Louisiana. That has the clarinet in it. That's right? That's the song that has that doo-doo-doo. Yeah, it's awesome. That's such a good song, and it's so hooky, and it sticks in my head. Even if we're going to say it's not the blues, when you make an album, it's a body of work. If 8 of the 10 songs or 9 of the 10 songs are blues songs where you're like, no doubt about it, it's a blues song, the other one gets to be part of that. And let me just tell you, I don't know anything about the blues, not like you do. It's a blues song. I heard it and I'm like, that's a great. I love the fact that the clarinet was in there, and I'm like, I love it.
I almost spit my coffee out the way you said that. Because this whole thing is, this whole conversation is so ridiculous. This whole controversy is just so absurd that I think that's why when it hit social media, it seemed to have taken on a life of its own. Because I don't know a lot about social media. I just got in, I just logged into Messenger or something from Facebook like 3 days ago because I had hundreds of people trying to message me. I mean, I'm still figuring this stuff out. It's taken on a life of its own, and I know people have shared that open letter. And because it's just it's dumbfounding.
Well, I like that fact that you don't know anything about Messenger and all the nonsense that happens in social media because you're about busy making the blues for us, you know? And so, good art, we've learned this, good art makes you uncomfortable. So thank you for making me uncomfortable and cracking open your album. I don't know that I wouldn't necessarily listen to it otherwise. I don't consume a lot of new music. That's just where I'm at musically in my life. But I love that I got to listen to this album 3 times since yesterday, and just every single time just loved it more and more and more. Genuinely, this is a legitimate, like, you guys should go get this album. It's called Hotel Voodoo. You can buy it on Chris's website. You can buy it. You can listen to it on Spotify. Just go out and get this album, as a Christmas gift, because you're going to put this thing on, you're going to play it and be like, damn, thanks, Chris. This is really good. You could legitimately, it's just a fantastic album, man. You really have something to be proud of. And I'm sure you're happy with it. But let me just tell you, as an outsider, this is great. ChrisThomasKing.com. ChrisThomasKing.com is where you can go. You can buy it there. And just if I haven't said it enough, thank you, man. I'm sorry that you're having to go through this. We're doing our best to amplify your message because it matters to me. And I want you to do well and have the recognition you deserve for a great blues album.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure. At the end of my open letter, I said, "Does anybody really care?" And it's heartening to know that people do. So thank you.
There was Rayful, Silas, and Kelly, and don't forget old Henry Gray. When he played his piano, he put a smile on your face.